بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الهزن إذا شئت سهلا سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. أسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يجعل نياتنا خالصة لوجهه الكريم. I praise Allah and I thank Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. I ask Allah to send countless blessings and salutations on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, his family, his companions, and all those who follow them in excellence until the day of judgment. And I ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to grant us the sincere intention. Inshallah Ta'ala, we're going to start with our biographical reading on page 1087, the biographical note X290, Sheikh Al-Allama Nuh Ali Salman. Naam.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, Sheikh Nuh Ali Salman is Nuh ibn Ali ibn Salman al-Quda, born in 1939 in Ain Jannah near Ajlun, Jordan. His father was a Shafi'i scholar who was educated in Damascus under Sheikh Ali al-Dakar. And when he returned to Jordan, studied...
Ali al-Dakar was one of the great scholars of Damascus, among those who took knowledge from the great muhaddith of Sham, Sheikh Badruddin al-Hassani, who was the foremost scholar of hadith in all of the Sham areas. Naam.
And when he returned to Jordan, studied various works of the Islamic sciences, among them Ghazali's Ihya Ulum Ad-Din, which he read 7 times.
And you should take the point that the pious, they love to read in the Ihya. We'll read about As-Sada. He said that he read the Ihya 7 times. We'll read about As-Sada, Ba'alawi, and the sons of Imam al-Haddad, like Al-Hassan and his sons Ahmed and his sons Alawi, and those, they read the Ihya, some of them 80, some of them 100 times that they read in their lifetime, completely the Ihya of Imam al-Ghazali. And it was a habit among them, like the children of Al-Aydrus al-Akbar, that they would read the Ihya as a weird, and they would finish the Ihya every 40 days. So may Allah, we're working on reading these summaries and having reading circles where we just do the summary as a start of the Ihya, and we complete it every 40 days to get in that habit, inshallah. Naam.
And taught his 4 sons sacred law, grammar, and tenets of faith before sending them, each in their turn, to Damascus for an Islamic education. Nuh went in 1954, spending 7 years in the Islamic preparatory and secondary schools of Jama'iyya al-Ghura, founded by his father Sheikh, where in addition to secular subjects, he studied tenets of faith and Shafi'i jurisprudence from works like Umdatu Salik, The Reliance of the Traveler. Sudatu Salik. The Reliance of the Traveler, Matan Abi Suja, The Text of Abu Suja, and Nawawi's Minhaj at-Talibin, The Seeker's Road.
Here, all of these 3 books, you should highlight them because they are main books in Shafi'i fiqh. And in the Syrian curriculum, when they want to fast track it, when you want to fast track your studies of Shafi'i fiqh, they read in this order. So they would start with Matan Abi Suja first, then Umdatu Salik, then Minhaj at-Talibin. So that's like a fast way of acquiring Shafi'i fiqh. So you would read those 3 books, Matan Abi Suja'a first, then Umdat Salik. So even though it's worded different, the order would be Matan Abi Suja'a first, Umdat Salik second, and Minhaj al-Talibin third. And then after Minhaj al-Talibin, the student would have a grounding in Shafi'i fiqh, where he would read, usually on his own, the commentaries and of Minhaj. And that would be his completion of Shafi'i fiqh studies. Some other ways, like the way we do it, is much longer, but it is preparing the student who is not really an advanced or real strong student in fiqh. So we make it a little longer so that the person can have more time to absorb the knowledge. Go ahead.
Sorry. Which, with such sheikhs as Abdul Karim al-Rifa'i, Ahmed al-Basrawi, Abdul Razak al-Himsi, Naif al-Abbas, Mahmoud al-Rankusi, and
Sheikh Mahmoud al-Rankusi, rahimahullah ta'ala, he was the sheikh of Darul Hadith in his time. So where Imam al-Nawawi and Ibn Salah, where they were the heads of Darul Hadith al-Ashrafiyya in Damascus, in his time, Sheikh Mahmoud al-Rankusi was the sheikh of Darul Hadith. And alhamdulillah, one of my sheikhs, as a kid, was studying with Sheikh Mahmoud al-Rankusi in Darul Hadith, and he was the youngest of the children that stayed in the circle of Sheikh Mahmoud al-Rankusi. And when we would be talking, he would have this picture of that gathering with Sheikh Mahmoud al-Rankusi. And you would see all the elders and this little 12-year-old boy, which was my teacher. He would be in those circles. Hafidhahullah ta'ala. And you could see when he would talk about it, and he would share me stories about Sheikh Mahmoud al-Rankusi, he would have this real great attachment. And he would tell me, because he was a handsome young man, he said the Sheikh would always take good care of me so that nothing would happen to me, because he was from Lebanon, from Beirut. So he was in Syria as a young child studying. And he was in the early days of with those great scholars like Sheikh Mahmoud al-Rankusi, Sheikh Salih al-Farfur, all of those who were students of Badruddin al-Hassani, radiyallahu ta'ala. So that chain to Sheikh Badruddin al-Hassani is very close, just one link, 2 links from my teachers to Sheikh Badruddin, to the students of Sheikh Badruddin al-Hassani. So it is something that we take pride in, and we are very fortunate to have such a high senate to Sheikh Badruddin al-Hassani. Naam.
And the judge, Muhammad Khair al-Shama, and during which time he also attended the lessons of Sheikh Muhammad Hashimi.
Sheikh Muhammad Hashimi was among the great Shadhili scholars and a spiritual master in the Shadhili Tariqah. And here is something deep. He was a great Sufi master, right? But one of the things that he concentrated on, Sheikh Muhammad al-Hashimi, was the issue of Aqeedah. I want to show you something. 1 second. I think I pulled it. I love his works, but he has this book, Sheikh Muhammad al-Hashimi, and we're going to be quoting some of this. Miftah al-Jannah, which is the key to paradise, Sheikh Muhammad al-Hashimi, he was like a great, and this book is all in at-Tawheed, Aqeedah, by the Ash'ari school. And even though he was a spiritual master, he wrote most of his books in the area of at-Tawheed. And here's another one of his books, which is the Shar An-Nadhm Aqidati Ahli Sunnah, which is an explanation of a poem of the creed of Ahli Sunnah, Sheikh Muhammad Hashimi. And he talks about all these issues that we talked about. And here is another one of his books. I love reading his works. It is a compendium of his letters and his books that he authored. And we are going to be like quoting some of this because he was one of the great masters of Syria, of spirituality, and all of his books are heavy in the issue of Tawheed and explaining to show you how the path of Allah is in essence the reality of divine oneness. Subhanallah. Now,
from whom he took daily dhikr of the Shadili Tariqa. After secondary school,
all of the Shadhilis, especially from Syria, like Sheikh Noor, Sheikh Abdurrahman al-Shaghuri, all who they in that line, they're all from the students of Sheikh Muhammad al-Hashimi. So all of those who follow that Tariqa, Shadhiliya, especially from the Syrian or the Shami route, were students of Sheikh Muhammad al-Hashimi. Rahmatullah alayhi. Now,
after secondary school, he attended the College of Sacred Law at the University of Damascus for 4 years, much of his study devoted to Hanafi jurisprudence under Mustafa el-Zarqa, Wahbi el-Zuhaili, Abdul Rahman el-Sabuni, Amin el-Misri, Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuda.
Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuda, the great hadith scholar. You might want to highlight that name. When we talk about hadith in our modern time, Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuda is going to be a very important figure in that.
Muhammad al-Mubarak, Fauzi Faydullah, and others. He graduated in 1965 and returned to Jordan, where he joined the armed forces and worked with Sheikh Abdullah Muhammad al-Azam, whom he succeeded as Mufti in 1972. In 1977, he went to Cairo and spent 3 years in the master's degree program at Al-Azhar, where he studied fundamentals of law and belief. Under Sheikh Abdul Ghani, Abdullah Khalik comparative jurisprudence with Sheikh Hassan al-Shadili and heard the late rector of Al-Azhar, Sheikh Abdul al-Halim Mahmoud, lecture on Sufism. It was during this period that he wrote his Qada al-Ibadat wal-Niyaba fiha, making up acts of worship and performing them for others, with Sheikh Muhammad al-Nabadi as his supervisor, for which he received his master's degree in 1980. The following year, he enrolled in the doctoral program at the University of Imam Muhammad ibn Saud in Riyadh, and in 1986 took a doctorate for his second main work, Ibra al-Dhihima min Hukuk al-Ibad, fulfilling one's obligation to give others their rights. From the time of his appointment as Mufti in 1972, Sheikh Noor has discharged the duties of his office with energy and competence, writing hundreds of formal legal opinions in response to questions on all aspects of the religion of Islam, many of them published in the Armed Forces monthly religious journal, Al-Takira, The Reminder. In addition to lectures, books, and articles on sacred law, prophetic biography, tenets of faith, and other topics. During his tenure, the Jordanian army has been distinguished by having an imam in every unit who is not only part of it wherever it goes, but leads the obligatory prayers, gives weekly religious lessons, answers questions about Islam, and is subject to regular refresher courses in Shafi jurisprudence, Hadith, Quran, and tenets of faith. In the course of helping with the present volume, though busy with official duties, Sheikh Noor generously spent his after-work hours with the translator in sessions, often extending late into the night at his own home, never refusing any service he could render or declining to research any question connected with sacred law, and never asking for anything in return. He presently lives in Marsh el-Haman, near Amman, Jordan.
This was then, the Sheikh has since then passed, rahimahullah. He was a great scholar of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah as the Mufti of Jordan. And he has a book, it's called Al-Muqtasar Al-Mufid fi Sharh Jawharat al-Tawheed, which is in Aqidah. In the interdiction of that book, he mentions on page 5 the primary three sciences, which is ilm al-aqidah, which he calls ilm al-tawheed, right? Ilm al-sharia, right, which he knows as the knowledge of the sacred lips, the science of the sacred law, which is ilm al-fiqh, the science of al-fiqh, and ilm al-tasawwuf, and the science of Sufism. And on that was on page 5, he mentions it. And then on page 9, he mentions something that should be noticed, that the great scholars of the Muslims, from the scholars of hadith, the scholars of tafsir, the fuqaha, the scholars of jurisprudence, al-usuliyin, the scholars of the fundamentals of Islamic jurisprudence, and al-mutakallimin, those scholars of the field of tawheed and ilm al-kalam, he said, hum min al-asha'ira wal-maturidiyya. He said, all of them, they are from the Asharis and the Maturidis. He said, the Malikis and the Shafis and many of the Hanbalis, like Ibn al-Jawzi, are Asharis. And he said the Hanafis are Maturidi. And there he mentions that on page 9, there at the bottom. I'll show you so people can see it, right? And he mentions all of them as Ashari or Maturidi. And there is, why we mention this, is so that you expand your knowledge of scholars, you see their ranks, you see who they study from, and then you see what was their methodology. And I highlight that all the time so that one, because we live in an era, in a place like here in the West, where people are not familiar with traditional Islam, and they don't realize how vast and how many scholars and the sciences that they mastered and learned, and how we are all connected as Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah, meaning the Asha'ira and the Maturidiyya and the Hanafis and the Malikis and the Shafis and the Fudala, the noble of the Hanabila. This is Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Inshallah, with that, these are just all indications. Inshallah, you can memorize those names, highlight some of them. As we talk about these scholars, and then we go to different books, you'll become familiar. And after a while, what I would suggest you do, a suggestion for you, is that when you learn about us, make a chart for yourselves. This is a suggestion for everyone. Go from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, put 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th century, 5th century, 6th century, all the way down to the 15th century, to our time. Have a notebook that's just for that. And then every time you learn about a scholar, write his name in the century he was in, right? So if you learn about somebody, a Sahaba, write them in the 1st century. You learn about the Tabi'een, you learn about Imam al-Shafi'i, Imam Malik, Junayd al-Baghdadi, Imam al-Nawawi, and put them in the century where they were at, so that you start concentrating when you learn about scholars. Then after a while, you're going to notice, you're going to know a bunch of scholars through all of our Islamic history, their ranks, something about them. This is something that will help you. So when we talk about connected chains, it is easy to you to see the scholars in their time, where they were, their place, and then you can see how Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah was one solid group for the majority of the Muslim nation from the time of the Prophet to today. And as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Inna Allah la yajma'u ummati ala dalala, fa idha ra'aytum ikhtilafan fa alaykum bis sawad al-a'zam. That Allah, the Prophet ﷺ said, that Allah will never allow my nation to agree on misguidance. So whenever you see difference, then follow the majority. By making such a chart, you will notice the majority. You'll look at time and place. You'll look at in each era, each century, and in every place among the Muslims, you'll notice that the great scholars were Asha'ira, Maturidiyya, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, Hanbali, and all of them were Sufi. This is something you'll notice after study, and it will help you from being tricked by modern day innovations. Now, we're going to go to our book, Sunan al-Tawfiq, and today we're going to try, if I can keep my mouth closed, inshallah, we're going to try to read from page 69 to page 88. That is from fasting all the way through dealings. So fasting, Hajj, some aspects of dealings, and then we're going to stop at the section of Tazkiyatun Nafs, purifying the self, which is Wajibat al-Qabiyah. Why? Because Ramadan is coming, so we're going to have to go back to this issue. Hajj is coming after Ramadan. We're going to go back to Hajj. And dealings, we talk about them as they come up. So this is to get you to be aware of these sections, but when their time comes, we'll discuss them in more detail. That's why this knowledge, the Fard Ain, is also called Ilm al-Hal. Let me write this for you. The obligatory knowledge is also named as Ilm al-Hal, which is that knowledge that you need at the moment or immediately, right? So it is when a teacher teaches, this is how we learn the same way when we learn this book, that the teacher would teach us what we needed at the moment. Why do I always mess this up? And then come back to the sections that we don't need immediately in our studies. So I was fortunate yesterday to have a long discussion with one of my original teachers. I was so happy to talk to him. And we were talking about this issue of, sticking to what the people need and taking them step by step, And so I said, let me follow instructions and let us cover these issues, go over them so you're aware of them, that they are obligatory things to learn. But when the time, maybe in Sha'ban, before Ramadan, we'll come back and we'll do the section of fasting with details. Then when it's before Hajj, we'll come back and do the section of Hajj with details. And the actions of transactions and mu'amalat, we'll read them as you're not needed to know them until you go into them. So inshallah, we'll make you aware. Time. Al-Fatiha to the soul of the author, Al-Imam Al-Habib Abdullah bin Hussein bin Tahir. Al-Fatiha. Go ahead.
The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, Chapter 4, Fasting. Who is required to fast and who is allowed to not fast? Fasting the month of Ramadan is required of every responsible Muslim. Fasting is not valid and not permissible for a woman doing menses or postpartum bleeding, and they are required to make it up.
So in order for fasting to be valid, there's a point that we should keep in mind, and not in details, that the person must be Muslim and they must be mukallaf when they are obligated to fast, right? They can fast, the mumayyiz child can fast, right? But he's not obligated to do it. But when he gets 10 years old, it is the obligation of the guardian to order them with fasting, right? But as an obligation, and meaning if they left it out there sinful, the person needs to be mukallaf, and they have to be Muslim. Now,
breaking the fast is permissible for, number 1, a traveler on a journey that permits shortening prayer. Even if fasting is not difficult for him, it is obligatory for him to make it up. 2 through 4, someone who is sick, pregnant, and nursing. But for the last 3, it is only when fasting is difficult enough to make unbearable, or they fear this for themselves, or the last 2 fear this for their child. It is permissible for them to break the fast, and they are required to make it up. An expiation is required for the last 2 if they broke it out of fear for the child only. It is permissible for someone to break the fast if fasting causes them extreme difficulty due to age or sickness they are not expected to recover from. An expiation is required from them for every day they break it, but no makeup is required from them.
Mm.
Obligatory acts of fasting and its conditions.
Remember, we talked about all acts of worship have fara'id and shurut, or arkan and shurut. So here the author is going to mention the arkan. These are the obligatory elements that are part of the fast, and the shurut are conditions that must be met before it can begin in a valid manner. Now,
Obligatory acts of fasting and its conditions. It is required that the intention be made during the night for obligatory fast, by intending to fast the next day at some time between sunset and dawn, and by identifying it by bringing it to mind that he is fasting for Ramadan, a vow and expiation or something else each day.
mm,
And it is required to refrain from fast breakers, i.e., from number one,
so these are mubtilat. If one was fasting, these things would invalidate the fast. Or you can say mufattirat, as in things that break the fast. But these would nullify things that would nullify. If any of them occur, it nullifies. So you're having conditions, you're having requisites, arkan, and then you have those things that invalidate the fast. Now,
number one, intercourse that would require bathing. Number two, ejaculation via self gratification, i.e., intentionally causing the release of ejaculate, or via contact like touching even without intending ejaculation. Number three, inducing vomiting, i.e., intentionally causing something to exit from his stomach to his mouth, such as through using his finger. Number four, apostasy, i.e., exiting Islam by saying, performing, or believing what is disbelief.
I want to pause here briefly to highlight something. And you should highlight this point. He said, عن الردة أي الخروج من الإسلام بقول كفر أو فعل كفر أو اعتقاد كفر. Right? Apostasy, meaning going out of Islam, right? By a blasphemous statement, by a statement that is disbelief, by an action that is disbelief, and by a belief that is disbelief. I want to warn you of something, and it's a harsh ruling. It is important that you learn your religion. There is a rule in Islam. There is in every madhab, in every school, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, Hanbali, in all the major books of al-fiqh, religious Islamic jurisprudence, there is a chapter, a section called Ridda, apostasy. And by the consensus of all four schools, apostasy is either by statements, actions, or beliefs. In other words, a person could be a Muslim, utter the Shahada, and believe something, or say something, or do something. The consequence of that saying, or that belief, or that action takes them out of Islam. And it is important that you realize that there are things that will make you a non-Muslim. There are beliefs or sayings and actions that will nullify, invalidate your shahada. And what is on it? You need to know those things to protect your Islam. And the author had a whole section back in the creed on apostasy. And he mentioned it. Why? Because it was a time where people were committing a lot of blasphemous things, a lot of disbelief. So some of us who didn't learn the religion well, we accept kufr from people, that someone utters blasphemy or believes blasphemous things or do blasphemous things, some of them which contradict scholarly consensus, and they're necessarily known of the religion, and the person would accept that. I want to give you a rule that I want you to write down. It's the rule in the religion is الرضا بالكفر كفر. الرضا بالكفر كفر. To be pleased with disbelief in and of itself is disbelief. Be careful. Ignorance is not bliss. Because oftentimes someone would utter things or someone would believe things that's not permissible in Islam. It's kufr. And if you accept that, if you say that's okay, it's okay to believe that, everyone has a right to believe whatever, that is statement in itself, that belief in itself is kufr. So be careful, right? It's very important that you understand this. You have to know the difference between iman and kufr. Faith, true belief, and disbelief. That's an obligation upon every mukallaf to distinguish that. So at least you can control people who have belief whatever they want, right? But from your side, you cannot accept. From your side, you must enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong. And at the lowest level, at the heart, even though I cannot do nothing about that blasphemous statement you said, I can't change it. But in the heart level, I have inkar of that. I do not accept that, right? And if I have the ability, I'm going to speak about it. I'm going to warn that this is not permissible, right? This is not permissible. I'm going to warn against that. It's not valid to say that. It's not valid to believe that. I want you to understand this. It's very important. And a lot of times people don't know, so they accept kufr. Oh, we all Muslim. That's kufr. That's not Islam. We're not all Muslims. That's blasphemous. And we cannot accept it. So just keep that in mind and learn the creed well. And that's why when people say Aqidah is not important, yes, it is, because it's dangerous. If you don't know Aqidah well, you may fall out of Islam yourself. So it's not something that is light. It's not an issue we can just pass over. La, we must know our religion well. Barakallahu bikum. Go ahead.
Number 5, introducing any substance, i.e. whatever has volume, even if small, into a cavity, even without eating or drinking, except plain pure saliva from its source, i.e. its origin, which is the mouth. Is a condition for the validity of fasting. Number 1, to not be insane, even for a moment. Number 2, to not be unconscious during the entire day, from sunrise until sunset. Sleeping all day is not harmful to the fast, neither is being unconscious for part of it. Unlawful fasting. It is not valid, nor is it permissible to fast. Number 1, the 2 Eids. Number 2, the days of Tashriq, the 3 days immediately after Eid al-Adha. Number 3, the second half of Shaban and the day of doubt, unless one connects it, i.e. the second half of Shaban and the day of doubt, with what is before it, or fast it as a make-up fast, a vow, or a set habit, weird, like habitually fasting Monday and Thursday.
Here, let me take this question, one quick question. This is not the time for questions, but this is an important question. If you have a blasphemous or a kufr belief, how do you return to Islam? Do you have to take the shahada publicly again? You don't have to say it publicly. You have to take the shahada. And it's better that someone heard you so that people know you return to Islam. But as for yourself, you must utter the testification of faith, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah, while leaving off that blasphemous belief or statement or action. So once you know that you fell into an action of disbelief or a statement of disbelief or a belief that necessitates disbelief, you must leave it off first and then utter the testification of faith, right? You can't still have the belief and just say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, nor can you say astaghfirullah. You can't just say, oh Allah, forgive me. What is this disbelief? You have to re-enter Islam. Naam. Go ahead.
Intercourse in the daytime during Ramadan. Someone who spoiled a fasting day of Ramadan without having a dispensation, ruqsa, for breaking it through intercourse, and anyone who voluntarily complied with him bears the sin, for them both breaking it, and is required to make it up immediately, i.e. after the day of Eid al-Fitr.
Yes, when one utters the shahada after falling into an act of apostasy, one utters the shahada with the intention of re-entering Islam, with the intention of embracing Islam. One cannot utter the Shahada for the reward. One needs to utter the Shahada to become a Muslim, because apostasy took you out of Islam. Now you need to utter the Shahada to re-embrace Islam. Now, go ahead.
And he, the man, not the woman, is required to make the expiation, which is the same as the one for likening one's wife to one's kin, zihar. That expiation
Vihar.
Zihar, excuse me.
Mhm.
That expiation is to free an unimpaired believing mu'min slave. If he is unable, he must fast 2 months consecutively. If he is unable to fast, he must give 60 poor people, giving each one a volume of the dominant staple food in the land equal to the volume of 2 hands held together for scooping.
Now, so now Kitab al-Hajj. And we're going to come back over these rules before Ramadan with a lot of details. But for now, you should review it. And I would suggest to all of you before Ramadan to memorize all of these basic masail, these basic cases related to fasting. And you should read them. It's only a few pages, so that when we talk about the details, you already have the foundation in your mind. So you have, this is January, February, March, April. So we got 2 months, 2.5 months roughly, somewhere around there, towards before Ramadan begins. So you got a lot of time to read these rules over and put them in your mind, so that when we talk about them in details, well, that'll be about another month and a half, you're familiar with them. And so your fast will be valid, and you know all the extra rules, and we can learn the optional aspects, and we really have a good Ramadan this year, inshallah, tabaraka wa ta'ala. Now,
Chapter 5, Hajj. Who is obligated to perform Hajj and Umrah? The Hajj and Umrah pilgrimages are required once in a lifetime for every Muslim who is free, responsible, able to travel there and back to his land, and has funds in excess of his debts, suitable housing and clothing, and to cover whomever he is required to support during the period of his travel there and during his return.
so this is something that is in the Shafi'i school. Both al-Hajj and al-Umrah is obligatory in the Shafi'i school. Now,
Essential elements of Hajj and Umrah.
so these are the arkan. Remember we talked about, and keep this in mind. It'll make it easy for you to memorize all of the cases related to every subject. If you divide things into conditions, shurut, arkan, and mubtidat, the conditions, the obligatory parts, and the invalidators, it will make you easy to recall all the rules. Now, so we're talking about the arkan of al-Hajj. Now,
The essential elements for Hajj are: number 1, entering the state of pilgrimage by saying in his heart, I intend to perform Hajj and enter into it for the sake of Allah Ta'ala Most High.
Allah.
Number 2, standing on Arafah. Number 3, circumambulating the house. Number 4, traversing between Safa and Marwa. Number 5, shaving or trimming for men and just trimming for women. The minimum for trimming is 3 hairs from the head. They, i.e., the aforementioned essential elements, with the exception of standing on Arafah, are the essential elements of Umrah. Those
So the same arkan or furud, right, of Hajj are the same for Umrah, except uh, Arafat. No, I'm standing on Arafat. There's no Arafat for that. No, go ahead.
These essential elements have obligatory actions and conditions that must be observed. What is unlawful to pilgrims?
So
Some,
each rukn and all there are conditions from that, and we'll talk about them before Al-Hajj.
Someone who has entered into the state of pilgrimage for Hajj or Umrah is forbidden from: number 1, using perfume like fragrance. Number 2, greasing the hair or beard with oil and the like. Number 3, removing nails or hair. Number 4, intercourse and its precursors, like kissing lustfully. Number 5, contracting a marriage for himself or someone else, and it is not legally effective. Number 6, hunting wild edible land prey. Number 7, covering the head and wearing clothing that envelops his body or a complete part of his body for men. Number 8, covering the face and wearing gloves for women.
Mm.
What becomes obligatory due to performing an act that is unlawful during pilgrimage? Whoever did any of those unlawful things bears the sin and the expiation for acts other than contracting a marriage. Intercourse adds to the above, and it ruins Hajj and Umrah, the obligation of making them up immediately, i.e., without delay, and having to finish what was spoiled.
Mm.
Obligatory acts of Hajj and Umrah.
Here in the Shafi'i school, al-fard or al-rukn or al-wajib normally means the same thing, right? But only in Hajj is there a difference between fard and wajib, or the rukn and wajib. And so it's only in Hajj. So when we say a rukn and a wajib in Hajj, there's going to be different things. If you leave out a rukn or a fard in Hajj, the Hajj is invalidated. If you leave out a wajib, then you have to make an expiation, right? So that's the only difference between, so in other things in the Shafi'i school, when you say wajib, when you say fard, when you say rukn, it means the same thing, except in al-Hajj. Now, so you notice he mentioned the fard parts, and now he's going to mention wajibat, those essential obligations. Now,
Entering into pilgrimage at the appointed times and locations is required for Hajj and Umrah. And the Hajj, these are also required. Number 1, spending the night at Muzdalifah for a moment during the second half of the night of Eid. Number 2, spending the night at Mina for more than half the night, each of the nights at Tashriq. Number 3, throwing pebbles at Jamrat al-Aqaba on the day of Nahr, i.e. Eid. Number 4, throwing pebbles at the Jamrat pillars on the days of Tashriq. Number 5, the farewell circumambulation. Hunting and foraging within the sacred precincts. It is unlawful to hunt prey within the 2 sacred precincts, the Meccan and the Medinan, and to cut their trees for those making a pilgrimage and for those who are free of it, i.e. not making pilgrimage. In addition, there is an obligatory expiation for performing these acts in Mecca.
maybe, inshallah, not this year, it's too early, too late. Maybe next year or the year after, we could all go together, so that we could go to Umrah together, and we could go together, and those high prices that were mentioned, we can get them way down. But we would go as a group, and it would be a great benefit that all of us all share through this platform daily, that we all go together, inshallah. And we could arrange that where we all would, so we'd get a group package and we would go as a group together. And we'll have lessons and classes in Mecca and Medina and visit the scholars, and inshallah. So inshallah, maybe we can plan for it, maybe next year. This year, I don't even know if it's going to be a Hajj or with this Corona thing. So we could plan for it later. We'll see how it works, but we can put our intentions toward, and even if we're able to do it, mashallah, Allah will reward us. But inshallah, we'll talk about it. Inshallah, we'll. I've been asked to do it many times, but I've done it myself, but in these groups. But maybe we'll do our own group, inshallah, with all of us who didn't. We've been familiar with each other doing online, so maybe we get to meet Hajj pros. La ilaha illallah. Mashallah. So inshallah, we'll make our intention. Let us make the intention to do it and see how Allah facilitates. Maybe within 1 year or 2. Not this year, but the next one or the one after. And inshallah, Allah gives us the reward of our good intentions and manifests it by His tawfiq. Naam, go ahead. So these are mu'amalat. We're going to go through this. And inshallah, we're going to come back with all of these cases and with some details. MashaAllah. Go ahead.
Chapter 6, Transactions. What is required in
So
transactions
what we
in
covered
marriage?
first, remember we talked about the sacred law has basically four categories. And when we get to the bigger books, there'll be more in detail. You have the section of Aqidah, which is a separate science, Ilm al-Aqidah. But in this book, the author gave is a summary. So he gave an indication to Aqidah. The second is Ibadat in al-Fiqh. So the section of al-Fiqh. You have Ibadat, which is from at-Tahara to Hajj. Then you have Munakahat, or marriage and divorce and those dealings. Then you have Mu'amalat, which is buying, selling, and things that related to that. And then you have rules of crimes and punishment, and that is usually covered in the bigger books of al-Fiqh. So here, there's an indication to the rules of buying and selling and marriage and things like that. Now,
What is required in transactions and marriage? Every responsible Muslim is required to refrain from entering into something until he knows what part of it Allah Ta'ala has made lawful and unlawful. Allah Ta'ala, glorified as He, has ordained things for us, i.e., made us responsible for them, and we must observe whatever Allah Ta'ala has ordained for us.
So here's the general rule with all dealings, right? Whenever the Muslim who is mukallaf, he wants to go in something, he must learn what is lawful and unlawful in that thing before he goes into it. So if you're not doing business, then you don't need to know the rules of business. But the minute you go into business, buying and selling and trading, you need to know the rules that relate to that. If one is not hiring or being hired, one doesn't know the need to know the rules. But once you do it, you got to learn the rules. If one is lending or borrowing, one doesn't need to know the rules until one enters it. So the general rule here is anytime you go into a thing, before you do it, right, you must learn the law, the rules of the religion related to that thing. Allah sent rules by way of the Prophet ﷺ, and it's obligatory upon us to learn those rules and to adhere to them. As Imam al-Bukhari mentioned in the book of knowledge, he had a section, he said, Bab al-ilmu qabla al-qawli wal-amal. The section, knowledge must precede any statement or action. Now,
Allah Ta'ala Most High has permitted sales and prohibited unlawful gain, riba. The sacred law has restricted sales, which has been rendered a proper noun through the definite al, i.e., the sale, that Allah Ta'ala has permitted. Not everything referred to as sales, with qualifiers, conditions, and essential elements that must be observed.
Here, keep in mind, when he's talking about Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Whenever he's talking about this action of sales or buying and selling, you must know the conditions and the integrals, right? The conditions and the integrals before you, and you must observe them. Keep this in mind. Conditions, integrals, invalidators. Conditions, integrals, invalidators. Shurut, arkan, mubtilat. And everything you deal with, make sure you observe these things. Now,
anyone who intends to sell and buy must learn them. Otherwise, he will consume unlawful gain whether he wants to or not. The Messenger of Allah Ta'ala, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, may Allah Ta'ala bless him and grant him peace, said, the trusty trader is resurrected on resurrection day with the prophets and the truthful ones and the martyrs. Al-Tirmidhi transmitted it and judged previously authenticated. This is only because of what he faces of struggling against his lower self, nafs, and his whims, and compelling the two to conduct contracts according to what Allah Ta'ala Most High has commanded, i.e. the lawful way. Otherwise, one cannot be unaware of that with which Allah Ta'ala has threatened those who transgress limits. It is the same for all other contracts, including rentals, personal loans, collateral, acting as an agent, deposits for safekeeping, lending items, partnerships, sharecropping, and others. Their conditions and essential elements must be observed.
And the rank of the one, that sincere tradesperson or that sincere one who goes into business has that high rank. Why? Because money is easily something that the nafs is inclined to, right? When it comes to money and gain and worldly things, the desire is attracted to that. So it's you need a sense of mujahada, struggle against the nafs. And because you have to do that, you have a high rank with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because, people easily give in to their desires, Subhanallah. Now,
The marriage contract is even more in need of additional care and checking to take precautions against what results when the conditions are missing.
and here, even though the author didn't go in detail about marriage, for us, I would suggest that any of you who are planning on getting married or have been married is to learn the rules of marriage well. And when you conduct your marriages, make sure that you have a teacher or an imam or someone who is very aware of the rules of marriage and divorce. Because too many times we come across some issues. People come to us, they were married, and the marriage contract was not done properly. So even though they thought they were married, they're actually still in the state of fornication. Why? Because the marriage contract wasn't done properly. And the stories about that are just too many. And likewise, when they end up having issues with their marriage, the divorce oftentimes is done improperly. And sometimes the woman would still be married and she would go get married to someone else thinking she's divorced, but she's not divorced. And these issues need to be worked out. So the rules of marriage and divorce need to be learned well. Likewise, the rules of child custody for those who have children after the marriage is dissolved, how to work with the children. So all of these rules are important. Now,
Forbidden sales. Unlawful gain, riba, is unlawful. Doing it, consuming it, recording it, i.e., the contract, witnessing it, tricks to accomplish it. It is of several types, some of which are: number one, selling gold or silver from the other on credit, i.e., for a term. Number two, selling gold or silver for the other without exchanging them on the spot where the contract took place, even without stipulating a term. Number three, selling either gold or silver for its own type in that same way, i.e., on credit or without exchanging on the spot. Number four, selling either gold or silver for its own type with a lack of equality in weight. Number five, selling foodstuffs for each other in that way, i.e., on credit or without exchanging on the spot, even for a different type, and a lack of equality if they are of the same type. Excuse me.
for interest, as we can see, there are many types, and we're going to have a separate class for this where we talk about the different types of interest or riba. As we think that riba is only when you go get a loan from a bank and it's money on money. No, there are many different types of riba, and we're going to go into those in detail later, inshallah. And this just gives you an indication. Now,
These are unlawful. Number six, selling what one has not possessed. Number seven, selling animal flesh for the animal.
Came to me, I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday. I was doing some business overseas, and they was like, there was a area filled with some product, and they said to me, you can have all the stuff here for this price. I said, what's in there? He's like, this item. I said, this is not valid. I don't even know what the items are. It's not a valid thing. You cannot buy something that's unknown, right? So, and nor can you sell something that you don't have control over and you're not authorized to sell. So if you say, I got to find out and go to a third person, the owner, and ask him, then you're not authorized to sell it. So you cannot sell. Like, so we're still working to negotiate out. But not knowing the rules of the religion could get you in an invalid sale. And as to show you how important the rules is, what the person originally showed me after I mentioned this case, and then they showed me what was for sale, and then when I ordered it, the original owner came back and said, no, that's not for sale. Which shows you why the rules of the religion are so important, right? Subhanallah, subhanallah. No, go ahead. So, I mean, that knowing the rules will save you, and then we won't have an argument and a dispute later. Subhanallah. No.
Number 11, sales performed by an individual who is not responsible, i.e., buying from him and selling to him. Number 12, selling what is useless. Number 13, selling what cannot be delivered. Number 14, selling without a verbal contract, i.e., an offer and an acceptance. Number 15, selling what cannot be owned, like a free man and unclaimed lands.
I remember learning this case, subhanallah. Well, let me stop. But I remember learning this case. I used to, when I first started learning the rules, I would go to the store and I would make the verbal contract. And I remember the cashiers used to, they see me coming. I know, we got to do a verbal contract. They got used to me making a verbal contract. You know, they just ring it up and I would say, I buy these items for that price. Do you accept? And they were looking at me. I said, just say, I accept. I sell you these items for this price. And the cashiers got used to me doing that in the supermarket. SubhanAllah. No, go ahead.
Number 16, selling what is unknown. Number 17, selling filth like a dog, blood, and all liquid intoxicants. Number 18, selling what is unlawful, i.e., what is unconditionally unlawful to use, like a tunbur, a kind of mandolin, and three-dimensional depictions of living animals, crucifixes, even from gold and even for decoration. Someone who sells them to someone who knows wants it for disbelief commits disbelief. Number 19, selling something that is pure and lawful to someone who knows intends to use it for disobedience, like selling grapes to someone who knows intends to use them to produce wine that will be unlawful to drink or to be unlawfully drunk. Number 20, selling intoxicants, even if they are pure, like hashish. Number 21, a forced sale is not valid. Number 22, selling something defective without showing its defect. Number 23, it is not valid to divide a deceased person's estate or to sell anything from it while his debts and bequests remain unfulfilled, and the wages for Hajj and Umrah have not been removed, even if they are required of him, except to sell something from his estate to execute these things. It is as though his estate is held as collateral for this. Likewise, these are unlawful. Number 24, selling a slave who has committed an assault, just like it is unlawful to dispose of the estate in the previous point, even by taking one danik, 1/6 of a dirham, from the estate. Selling him, the slave, is not valid until he clears his liabilities or his creditor authorizes its sale. That item.
Some may understand and they hear the word slave, especially in our context, we get kind of bent out of shape. But all the rules of the religion, they are to the day of judgment. So even if something doesn't occur right now or in our midst, that doesn't mean it's not occurring, and there are not rules to relate to it, and it doesn't mean it won't occur in the future, and there are rules to it. So in any case, even though we don't live with something, the rules of the sacred law still apply to that thing, right? The rules of the sacred law will always apply. And even if we don't, so in that case, we don't have that issue, so we don't need the rule. But others may have that issue now, and they had it in the past, and some may have it in the future. So therefore, the rule applies. Now,
Number 25, sapping the buyer's or seller's interest after the price has settled in order to bid against the other or buy it from him. It is even worse after the contract has occurred during the time for choosing whether to cancel the sale. Number 26, buying food, i.e., staple foods like wheat, when prices are high and supply is low, in order to hoard it and sell it at a higher price. Number 27, increasing the price of the items to feed someone else. Number 28, separating a female slave from her child before it reaches discernment by something like selling one of them and not the other. Number 29, committing fraud in sales like concealing a known defect. Number 30, cheating when measuring volume or weight or length or quantity. Number 31, lying during the sale. These are unlawful. Number 32, selling cotton or some other commodity while lending dirhams to the buyer and stipulating that he, the seller, increase the price of the commodities because of the loan. Number 33,
Oh,
lending to a weaver or some other employee while stipulating that he be employed for less than the typical wage because of that loan. This loan in this transaction and the other one before it is named Rapta.
mhm.
Number 34, lending to a farmer and stipulating that he wait until the time of harvest and then buying their food for less than the fair market price by a little, and he takes it in place of his loan. This is called Makdi. Similarly, many or most of the transactions of the people of this time are outside of the code of the sacred law. Whoever
And this
wishes,
is important that we learn these rules because we do a lot of dealings, and we got to make sure that Islamically there is it is that our transactions are valid. Now,
whoever wishes to please his Lord, i.e., obtain his reward and achieve his honor and safeguard his religion and his life, must learn what is lawful and what is prohibited from a scholar who is scrupulous, sincere, and compassionate in his religion, i.e., one who strives to remove difficulties from others, for seeking the lawful is an obligation upon every Muslim.
and here basically that all of these rules one needs to learn them bitalaqi from by direct contact from a scholar who is cautious in their religious matters, advising and really having a concern for the religion. Because sometimes you go to a person who doesn't have these qualities and they give you false judgments, right? Or they give you judgments outside of the schools of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, meaning the four schools. So it is important that you acquire that knowledge from someone who acquired that knowledge with an unbroken chain back to these great Imams, and from those great Imams back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now,
Obligatory support and related things. An individual who is affluent is required to support his poor parents, i.e., his male and female progenitors who are destitute, even if they are able to earn a livelihood, and his own offspring, i.e., his children and grandchildren, when they are destitute and unable to earn a livelihood due to young age or chronic illness. A husband is required to support his wife and provide her with her marriage gift, mahr. Must also give her an anonymity payment, muta, which is an amount of money given to her that they agree upon on the judge, or the judge determines if they disagree, if he divorces her for no fault of hers. An owner of a slave or animal is required to support them. He is not to burden them with work they cannot handle. He does not strike them without justification. A wife is required to obey her husband regarding her person, regarding intercourse and enjoyment, except what is not lawful, intercourse during menstruation and postpartum bleeding and sodomy, and not to fast voluntarily while he is present or when he is present, and not to exit his house except with his permission. Excuse me.
sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Inshallah, we'll try to take. Oh, that is something I thought about and I forgot. La ilaha illallah. Man, I hate that. Maybe it will come back. It was an important thing. I forgot. Ya Rab. So if you have some brief questions, we'll take maybe a few questions for about 5 minutes, inshallah. There is one I saw about the dog. The scholars, they have different positions in related to the najasa of the dog. What is recommended is that you don't have the dog in your house. Why? Because the dog has moisture, and that moisture will put najasa, which is a heavy najasa, around the house, or on your person, or on the place where you pray, and then you're going to have issues. So if you had a dog, it's not haram to have a dog, but it would be better that you had him outside as like a guard dog to protect the house if that was what you wanted to have. But bringing the dog in the house uh, is something you should avoid. Mm. I would refer you to go back to pages. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. From page 19 to page 28. So go from page 19 to 28 in this book, and there are many examples of each type, whether it is belief, whether it is actions, or whether it is statements. So if you go back to those, Abdul Rashid, you'll find all of those many examples. And there are too many to enumerate, but he gives some examples there, the author, Raymond. These are details. In each specific case, you should talk with a trustworthy scholar or teacher about your specific case, because there are ways in the Sharia to deal with. There are exceptions. These are the general rule. Then there's details for each case. So each case should be taken in its own, not as a general rule for every single thing. These are the general rules of the sacred law. Then each case should be evaluated upon the case. Mm. Non-Muslims cannot inherit from Muslims. So no, you don't divide property among non-Muslims. Mm. In your book, Reliance of the Traveler, you have a whole section on mu'amalat, right? So you can get a general idea of the rules there in this book of transaction and business. But when you're talking about don't read on your own, maybe have an idea to get the idea. But when you're going to a specific thing, you should ask about that specific thing. And that should be something you ask privately, don't ask publicly, because you can make difficulty for others depending, or the teacher may have to give you cases specifically related to your case that shouldn't be generally used, right? So the sacred law has a lot of details to it. And sometimes what would not be valid in one school is valid in another school, right? So when you're talking about a case that's specific, don't ask it generally, because the specific answer is related to your case, may not apply to others, right? So when you have those cases, you should ask about that specific case, and preferably those are things you should ask particularly to the scholar or a teacher in individual with that. Whenever you ask a question that's that you need for a personal situation, always ask the question in general, right? And the wise teacher will know when to answer and when not to answer, or how to answer. This is what we learn from our teachers. Now, you work it out. Usually, if it's super stressful about divorce, you should have a representative from your side, a representative from the side of the woman, and let them work together with you. Seek counsel before you divorce. Don't just do it on your own. Seek help from others. No, paper money is not haram. Inshallah, the more we try to adhere to the religion, with the success of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His tawfiq, inshallah, we'll overcome. But that's a general question, and I can't answer that. I know when Mahdi returns, and Isa, when Mahdi comes and Isa returns, Islam will overcome oppression. As for right now, Allahu A'lam, I don't know. We'll cover that case, inshallah, in our next book. The case of wiping over the shoes, we'll cover it in the next book. I'll tell you one point. In the meanwhile, the socks that we wear today, these thin regular socks, they're not valid to wipe over, right? So I'll tell you that. So for the rule, if you don't have leather socks for right now that come above your ankles, the tradition, the socks you see that people wear, or something similar to that, that's made for wiping over the sock, don't wipe over regular dress socks or white socks. They're not valid. And we'll go on the details of that. So that's just for the rule. Wipe over your feet, take off your socks. Find someone who is knowledgeable of the religion that you trust and consult them, right? So find someone who's knowledgeable of the religion that you trust, and then seek their counsel and let them advise you or direct you to someone who can help you. But make sure they learn the religion, right? You want counsel and advice from someone who knows the rules of the religion, even if they're not a scholar, but they know the rules of the religion. That's the best advice I would give you in that. So yeah, barakallahu fikum. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll start in the book of purification of the self. Babu Tazkiyatun Nafs. Inshallah. Alhamdulillah, we're moving along. But this book, we're not going to just study it one time. We're going to constantly be coming over this book. Even when we go to other books, we're still going to come back to this book and mention cases. So it's a book you should read. I suggest that all of you read this book at least 10 times, minimum. For the one who's really eager, I say you should read it 50 times. For the one who really, really want to know their deen, 100 times. Don't just read it once or twice. This is a lifetime book. You should read it over and over and over and over and over again till you master it. And for those who have real energy, I suggest you memorize the book, inshallah. Barakallahu fikum wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in bisir asrar al-Fatiha. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.